Would you save the man who killed your best friend? I had to answer that question in a church in Normandy while American blood was still wet on my hands and German artillery was tearing the village apart outside. My name is Kenneth Moore, and I'm about to tell you about the 3 days that proved everything I thought I knew about right and wrong was a lie. June 6th, 1944, 1:25 a.m. I slammed into French earth so hard I tasted blood. Parachute cords wrapped around my neck, choking me while machine gun fire chewed up the ground inches from my face. I cut myself free with shaking hands and ran toward the only thing I could see through the smoke and chaos. A church, white stone, red cross painted on the bell tower. Safety, or so I thought. Inside I found one other medic, Robert Wright. We had maybe 8 minutes before wounded paratroopers started bleeding through that door. No supplies, no doctor, just 2 terrified kids with medical bags and absolutely no idea we were about to face a choice that would define the rest of our lives. The first 12 hours were pure hell. Tourniquets on stumps that used to be legs, morphine shots into boys screaming for their mothers, pressure on wounds that pumped blood faster than I could think. Outside, the Germans took the village, lost it, took it again. The battle ground through houses like a meat grinder, and the screaming never stopped. Then I did something insane. I grabbed a wooden wheelbarrow and ran out into open fire to get more wounded, bullets snapping past my head. My only protection was a red cross on my helmet, and the slim hope that somebody out there still believed that symbol meant something. I loaded a paratrooper into that wheelbarrow and sprinted back through smoke and shrapnel, and by some miracle I made it. Then evening came and I brought in another wounded soldier. But when I kicked that church door open, everything stopped. Dead silence. Because the man I was carrying wasn't wearing American olive drab. He wore German field gray. His blood looked exactly the same as every American I'd tried to save. But the eyes staring at me weren't seeing a wounded human. They were seeing a traitor. I had maybe 3 seconds to decide. Drop him and walk away, or cross a line I could never uncross. I chose. And that choice started something that would either save us all or get every man in that church killed. What happened next changed warfare itself, changed how the Geneva Convention is taught, changed me. Stay with me, because this story ends somewhere you won't expect, and it starts right now. The first thing you need to understand about war is that training never prepares you for the moment your parachute fails to fully deploy, and you're falling toward enemy territory at terminal velocity, knowing you have maybe 4 seconds before impact. The second thing is that in those 4 seconds, your mind doesn't flash through your life like they say in books. It just screams one word over and over. No, 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 no. I hit the ground outside a small Norman village, and my world turned into fire and noise, and the sharp metallic taste of blood in my mouth. Parachute cords tangled around my neck like a noose, machine gun fire chewing dirt 3 feet to my left, tracer rounds lighting up the pre-dawn darkness in streaks of red and green that would have been beautiful if they weren't designed to kill me. I cut myself free with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and I ran, just ran, toward the only landmark I could see through the smoke and burning buildings. A church steeple with a white cross painted on the bell tower, catching the first grey light of June 6th, 1944. The door was unlocked. Inside smelled like centuries of candles and prayers and stone that had witnessed more suffering than any building should have to hold. And standing there already was Robert Wright, another medic from the 101st. We looked at each other, and in that look was every question and answer we needed. Are you scared? Yes. Are you staying? Yes. Do we have any idea what we're doing? No. But we're doing it anyway. We had maybe 10 minutes. 10 minutes of silence before the first wounded started arriving. We used that time to clear the pews, to set up what little equipment we had. 2 medical bags, handful of morphine syrettes, bandages that wouldn't last an hour. And then the door burst open, and a paratrooper stumbled in, holding his intestines in with both hands, and the real war began. His name was Danny. I know because he kept saying it. Danny from Ohio. Danny who was supposed to get married in August. Danny who bled out on a church pew while I pressed gauze into a wound that wouldn't stop pumping, and Robert tried to find a vein for morphine. We lost him. First casualty, and I remember thinking, this is it. This is the rest of my life. Watching boys die on stone floors while enemy artillery shakes dust from rafters overhead. But you don't get time to think in war. You just react. Another wounded man through the door, then 3 more. Then so many I lost count. Tourniquets on stumps that used to be legs. Pressure on chest wounds sucking air. Morphine into screaming mouths. The smell of copper and shit and burned flesh filling a building that had probably never known anything worse than incense. Outside, the battle intensified. Germans pushed into the village. Americans pushed back. The fight became this grinding house-to-house nightmare, and the screaming never stopped. Not once, just layered. Screaming from outside, screaming from the pews, screaming in my own head that I couldn't let out, because if I started, I might never stop. Robert worked across from me. We developed this rhythm. He'd prep. I'd operate. He'd stabilize. I'd move to the next. No words needed. Just 2 kids from different states who'd never met before today, moving like we'd trained together for years. And maybe that's what war does. Strips away everything unnecessary until all that's left is pure function, pure survival, pure desperate hope that the next breath won't be your last. Then I heard it. Wounded outside. American voices calling for medic. Calling my name even though they didn't know my name. Just calling for anyone. For hope. For a chance. And I couldn't sit there. Couldn't hide behind stone walls while men died 50 yards away because I was too afraid to cross open ground under fire. So I grabbed the church's old wooden wheelbarrow. It was maybe 200 years old. Wood so dry it would probably splinter if you looked at it wrong. And I ran out into hell. The sound hit me first, not the explosions, the silence between them. Those 2-second gaps where you can hear your own heartbeat and you realize how fast it's going, and you wonder if this is the last sound you'll ever hear. Then crack, machine gun fire from a window. Snap past my head close enough to feel the air move. I ran toward the voices, found a paratrooper with both legs shattered, helped him into the wheelbarrow, and I ran back. 50 yards, longest 50 yards of my life, every step expecting the bullet, every breath thinking this is it. But I made it. Crashed through the church door with a wounded man, and proof that maybe God still existed because there was no other explanation for why I wasn't dead. Loaded the paratrooper onto a pew, went back out, did it again, and somewhere in that repetition, I stopped being afraid. Not because I got brave, because fear requires thought, and I didn't have time to think. Just run, load, return, over and over until my legs stopped feeling like legs and started feeling like machinery that would keep going until it broke. Evening came, light turning gold through stained glass windows, painting wounded men in blues and reds and greens, like they were already part of some medieval painting about martyrdom. I made another run, brought back another wounded soldier, kicked the door open ready to hand him off to Robert, and the church fell silent, dead silent. Every man capable of turning his head turned it toward me, and I knew why. The man bleeding on my shoulder wasn't wearing American olive drab. He wore German field grey, young, maybe 19. Shrapnel had torn through his side and he was pale from blood loss, and his eyes were unfocused, but when they met mine, there was no hate in them. Just pain. Just the universal language of suffering that doesn't care about flags or anthems or who started what. I could feel every eye burning into me. The judgment. The betrayal. Someone whispered something that might have been traitor, and I had maybe 3 seconds to decide. Drop him outside. Let him die in the dirt like the enemy deserved, or carry him to a pew and cross a line that every man in this church would remember for the rest of their lives. I chose. Carried him to a pew in the back, started working, cutting away his uniform, packing the wound. wrapping bandages while my hands shook not from fear, but from anger. Anger that I had to make this choice. Anger that war forced us into this place where saving a life could be seen as treason. Robert appeared beside me, didn't say a word, just knelt and held the German's shoulders while I worked, and one by one the stares turned away. Because in that moment we decided something bigger than orders or nationality or flags. We decided this church was going to be different, that inside these walls the war stopped, that the red cross on my helmet meant what it was supposed to mean, no matter what. More Germans came, brought by their own guys, wounded in the same brutal ways, missing arms, faces burned by phosphorus, guts torn open by the same artillery that was killing our men, and we treated them all. Robert imposed a rule: no weapons inside the church. Americans left rifles at the door. Germans did the same. And for hours this building became the only place in Normandy where the war wasn't happening, where men from both sides lay on pews groaning in 3 languages, but all saying the same thing: help me, please, don't let me die. Night fell. Fighting outside reached peak intensity, tracers lighting up windows, explosions shaking the walls. Somewhere a building collapsed in a roar of timber and stone, and an American officer burst through the door. Captain, didn't get his name, told Robert and me that the 101st was pulling back. Germans were taking the village. We had 15 minutes to evacuate, and he looked at the wounded. 20 American soldiers, 8 Germans, men who couldn't walk, couldn't be moved without killing them. The officer knew it. We knew it, and without discussing it, Robert and I said we were staying. The officer tried to pull rank, ordered us out, and I looked him in the eye and said no, just no, because some decisions don't require explanation. Some choices are so obviously right that defending them would be an insult. Robert stood beside me, and the officer looked at us, looked at the wounded, and walked out without another word. The Germans took the village before midnight. We heard them moving house to house, heard American prisoners being marched past, heard the victory shouts in a language I didn't understand, but whose meaning was clear. Then the church door opened, and a German soldier stood there, rifle raised, ready to fire. His eyes scanned the room, saw the wounded, saw Americans, saw Germans, saw Robert and me standing there with blood up to our elbows. He lowered his rifle slowly, made the sign of the cross, and left. Robert let out a breath he'd been holding for maybe 5 minutes. We looked at each other, and something passed between us that I still can't put into words. Relief, maybe, or recognition that we'd just crossed into territory where normal rules no longer applied, where something bigger was protecting us. Faith or luck or cosmic coincidence, didn't matter which, just mattered that it worked. More German wounded arrived. Their medics brought them, asked for help in broken English, and we gave it. The church filled, every pew, men lying on the floor between aisles. The ones we thought wouldn't make it through the night got placed closest to the altar. Made sense. Short trip if the worst happened. And in that grim triage calculation, you could see what we'd become. Not American or German. Just 2 humans trying to hold back death with gauze and prayer and hands that wouldn't stop moving, even when there was nothing left to do. Morning of the 2nd day, a German officer arrived. Older, maybe 40. Had this look in his eyes like he'd seen too much and couldn't be surprised anymore. He stood in the doorway looking at the scene. Americans and Germans lying side by side. Robert changing a German's bandages while I stabilized an American. The officer took it all in. Then he smiled. First smile I'd seen in 2 days, and it was from an enemy commander. He walked in. Robert stopped him, pointed at the rule. No weapons. The officer looked at his pistol, looked at his men, nodded. They hesitated. He ordered them in German. They obeyed, stacked their weapons by the door, came inside unarmed, and the officer asked in perfect English if there was anything we needed. Robert said supplies, morphine, bandages, plasma if possible. The officer said he could get it. 24 hours. They shook hands. German officer and American medic, and the officer left. The supplies arrived that night. German medics brought them. More than we'd asked for. Enough to keep going for days. And I realized something then. The officer knew. Knew his own men were being treated here. Knew we weren't taking sides, just taking wounded. And in his world where orders were everything and mercy was weakness, he'd found a way to help without admitting it. By supplying American medics treating German soldiers, he was caring for his troops while maintaining the fiction that we were still enemies. Wars full of these contradictions. These moments where humanity finds cracks in the brutality and floods through. Day 3, the Americans counterattacked. We could hear the intensity building. Screaming eagles pushing back with everything they had. House by house they retook the village, and Robert and I kept working. Germans brought their wounded. Americans brought theirs. And the fighting surged around us like a tide hitting rocks, never quite reaching us, never quite stopping either. Then it happened. Crash of glass, something rolling across the stone floor. I looked, mortar round, live, spinning to a stop 3 feet from a pew with 5 men on it. Time stopped. Everyone who could see it froze. This was it. One defective fuse between us and oblivion. Between 60 lives and nothing. I closed my eyes. Thought about my mother. About a girl back home I'd never told I loved her. About all the things I hadn't done and wouldn't get to do. Waited for the flash. Nothing. Silence. Opened my eyes. Dud round. Robert moved before I could think. Picked it up. The absolute lunatic actually picked up a live mortar round. Threw it back out the window it came through. We heard it land outside. Heard nothing after. Still a dud. Still a miracle. Robert looked at me. I looked at him. And we laughed. This insane, hysterical laughter, because what else do you do when you should be dead but aren't? When grace or luck or mathematics saved you and you can't tell which. And it doesn't matter because you're alive. The laughing stopped when bullets tore through the church. Machine gun fire from outside. Glass exploding. Wood splintering. Men screaming. Robert ran to the door. I followed. Saw a Sherman tank 50 yards away. Its hull machine gun firing directly at the church. Robert sprinted toward it. No cover. Just ran at an American tank waving his arms, and I ran after him, because if he was going to die being shot by his own side, I wasn't letting him die alone. An American sergeant got there first, stopped the tank, started yelling at the crew. Robert tried to explain. The sergeant tried to apologize, but words felt useless. The damage was done. Inside we had 3 new wounded, glass cuts mostly, 1 serious from a ricochet. We patched them up, added them to the count, and kept working. A lieutenant showed up an hour later, said they needed the church steeple for an observation post, needed to spot German positions. I told him no. He pulled rank, said it was a military necessity, and I pulled something bigger than rank, told him this church was neutral ground, that the moment we weaponized it, every wounded man inside became a legitimate target, that I didn't care what his orders were or what tactical advantage it gave. This building stayed what it was, a place where the war stopped. He threatened court-martial. I threatened to report him for ordering the destruction of a clearly marked medical facility. We stood there, 2 Americans, technically on the same side, about to come to blows over principle. Robert stepped between us, said something I'll never forget. He said the war would be over someday. Could be months, could be years, but it would end. And when it did, we'd have to live with what we'd done inside it. Did the lieutenant want to live knowing he'd turned a sanctuary into a target? The lieutenant looked at the wounded, looked at us, and walked away. By the 3rd evening, the fighting had moved beyond the village, Germans retreating, Americans pursuing, and the church fell quiet for the first time since I'd arrived. Quiet enough to hear men breathing, quiet enough to count. 80 wounded had come through these doors. 78 were alive, 2 dead, Private Danny from Ohio, and a German kid whose name I never learned, but whose face I still see sometimes when I close my eyes. 78 out of 80 in 3 days of brutal combat. in a building with no supplies and two medics who barely knew what they were doing. The math didn't make sense. The survival rate was impossible, and yet there it was, written in breathing bodies and blood-stained pews, and the exhaustion so deep I couldn't feel my hands anymore. Robert and I sat on the church steps that night. First time we'd been outside together without running or carrying someone. The sky was clear, stars visible despite the smoke, and I asked him why he'd helped with the first German, why he'd backed my play when it could have gotten us both killed. He didn't answer for a long time. Then he said something I've thought about every day since. He said they were just kids, like us. Different uniforms, same fear, same blood, same mothers somewhere praying they'd come home. And when you saw them like that, really saw them, the uniform stopped mattering. Only the person underneath mattered. And persons deserve saving, all of them, no exceptions. The church still stands. I've been back twice, once in 1964, 20 years after, and again in 84, 40 years. Both times the bloodstains were still visible on the pews, dark brown marks that no amount of scrubbing had removed. They're still there today. The French keep them, a reminder of what happened, of what's possible when humans decide that mercy matters more than victory. There's a plaque now, outside, honoring Robert and me, calling us heroes, and every time I see it, I think about how wrong that word is. We weren't heroes. We were terrified kids doing the only thing that made sense, saving lives. Heroes would have been brave. We were just stubborn, too stubborn to let men die when we could stop it, too stubborn to see enemies when all we saw were patience. Maybe that's what heroism really is. Not courage, just stubbornness in the right direction at the right time. Robert died in 93, asked to be buried in the churchyard at Angerville-au-Plain, where he'd spent the 3 most important days of his life. Bureaucracy made it impossible. Rules about foreign nationals in French war cemeteries, but Robert was more stubborn dead than most people are alive. Someone got some of his ashes into France. Don't ask me how, don't ask me who, but there's a small plaque in that churchyard. 3 letters, R-E-W, Robert E. Wright, and he's there. At least part of him is there, in the place where he proved that even in war, even in the worst of what humans can do to each other, there's still room for what's best in us. I'm 96 years old now. Most of the men I served with are gone. Most of the men I saved are gone. The world's moved on. D-Day is history now. Pages in textbooks, black and white photos, old men telling stories that young people listen to politely but can't quite believe. But I was there. I lived it. And I need you to understand what I learned in that church, what 3 days of blood and prayer and impossible choices taught me. War is the worst thing humans have ever invented. It's brutal and pointless, and it destroys everyone it touches, whether they survive or not. But inside that worst thing, there's still space for the best thing, for mercy, for seeing the human in the enemy, for choosing to save rather than kill, even when killing is easier, even when saving might get you killed, even when no one would blame you for walking away. That choice is always there, in every war, in every conflict, in every moment when you have to decide between what's easy and what's right. And the men who choose right, who see the human before they see the uniform, those are the ones who prove that maybe, just maybe, we're worth saving after all. The church stands, the bloodstains remain, and somewhere in that stone building is the proof that even in the darkest moments of human history, even when everything says that mercy is weakness and compassion is suicide, even then we can choose differently. We can be better. We can save. All of us. No exceptions. That's what I learned in Normandy. That's what Robert taught me. And that's what I'm telling you now, 80 years later, from the other side of a life spent remembering 3 days when 2 terrified medics decided that inside one small church, in one small village, the war would stop. And it did. For 3 days, it stopped. And 78 men lived who shouldn't have. 78 families got someone back. 78 futures happened that should have ended in French dirt. That's not heroism. That's just humans being human in the best possible way. And if we could do it in 1944, under artillery fire with nothing but gauze and morphine and stubborn refusal to accept that some lives don't matter, then you can do it now. Whatever your battlefield is, whoever your enemy is, you can choose to see the person before you see the label. You can choose mercy over victory. You can choose to save. The story ends where it began, in a church, in Normandy, where bloodstains won't wash out and plaques honor choices made in seconds that echoed through decades, where every June 6th veterans and families and strangers gather to remember, to bear witness, to prove that what happened there mattered, still matters, will always matter. And when they ask what I did in the war, I tell them this: I saved 78 lives with a wheelbarrow and a stubborn medic named Robert Wright, who understood something it took me 3 days to learn. That mercy isn't weakness, compassion isn't surrender. And sometimes the most powerful weapon you have is the choice to not use one, to heal instead of harm, to save instead of kill, to be human instead of soldier. That's my story, that's my testimony, that's my proof that even in hell, even in war, even when everything says otherwise, we can still choose light. We can still choose life. We can still choose each other. The church stands. The bloodstains remain. And I pray that someday, long after I'm gone, someone will stand in that building and understand what Robert and I proved. That mercy is stronger than hate. That compassion survives when bullets don't. That humanity endures when everything else falls apart. Remember that. When your moment comes, when you have to choose, remember Angerville au Plan. Remember 2 medics who refused to see enemies, who only saw patients. Remember that 78 lives were saved because 2 humans decided the war stopped at their door. And choose mercy. Always choose mercy.